Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Yeah, I wanted to do a short little video on what is really going on. Well, my opinions of what's really going on in in the Caribbean right now, in Cuba as well as Haiti. Um, a couple of days ago, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated, um, and this really came as a shock to a lot of people because we didn't we didn't we didn't really hear anything about um, what was really going on. The situation in Haiti is particularly how they were handling the global pandemic. It was not really known to us here in the United States. It was not something that they were talking about or they were promoting discussing on the news at all. Um, Haiti's situation it has been for all of its history a tumultuous nation plagued by natural disasters, poverty, bad government, and dictatorships, and interference by the United States since its independence in 1804. But as of late, the countries that have been in the news, like us, like China, like Japan because of the Olympics, like Iran and Israel because of the elections, like India because of how the pandemic isn't impacting them, but Haiti was not in the news. So Haiti's situation kind of went under the radar. However, we woke up to this news on on July the 7th, and the whole country was shocked, looking into reasons as to why this was really going on. And the first thing I remember hearing is that they said that the assassins spoke Spanish and American English. So immediately my mind jumped to this might have something to do with the United States. The United States, the DEA, the CIA, and other organizations like this might have something to do with the assassination of this president. They may be trying to overtake Haiti somehow and move into Haiti's territory and try to, influence the government somehow. And that is exactly what I suspected to be true is what is true. There is a man in Florida, a man of Haitian descent, with backing from the United States. His name is Emmanuel Sasson. After it's come out that he was using his money to finance a rebellion from Florida into the Haitian government. He was a politician of Haitian descent trying to directly influence uh, Haitian politics from Florida, and he hired Colombian assassins to take out Moise and his wife in the middle of the night. So, in other words, an organization based here in the United States in the state of Florida infiltrated the Haitian government using the DEA and Colombian assassins to stage a coup and overtake of Haiti. As many people know, the Haitian American community, particularly in Florida, is one of political prominence and political power, much like the Cuban community in Miami. Now that moves me into a segue on the Cuban community. Now, yesterday, there were reports going on that there were a lot of protests in Cuba about food shortages. Now, Cuba has gone through a lot of issues, like the rest of the world, because of COVID, because of the Hurricane Elsa, and because of this, the way the government responds, because it is a command economy, because it is communist, um, a lot of times there will be shortages of food. There will be rations of food. I'm pretty sure this is not the first time in history since 1959, since um, the establishment of communism in the island, that this has happened. But what is different with this is how the U.S. government and the Biden administration is involved with this. The Biden administration are the ones encouraging rebellion in Cuba. They're fomenting the seeds of rebellion in Cuba because Joe Biden and the United States, and really all the presidents, not just Joe Biden, but all the presidents of the United States, um, they would like nothing more than to overtake the Cuban, to overtake Cuba once again and to infiltrate Cuba once again. Because Cuba, from the time of the Spanish American War to the time of the, which was in 1898, to the time of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, was America's playground. It was the first Las Vegas. It was Las Vegas before Las Vegas. There was mafia, mafia and organized crime used to run the Cuban government, and through their dictators, through puppet dictators like Batista, um, the United States was able to basically take control of Cuba and rule Cuba indirectly. And then in 1959, when Castro took power, he got rid of all that. He got rid of all the mafia. He got rid of all the organized crime, and he instituted communism. That's true. Not saying that communism is a good thing, but what he did do was he leveled the playing field for a lot of um, Cubans. He instituted um, literacy courses throughout the country. He improved the healthcare system, but he also restricted a lot of the freedoms of Cuba because um, even though he did some good things, he did some really horrible things as well. And then in 1961, organized crime, Cuban organized crime, this Cuban organized crime outfit um, known as the Corporation, led by a man named Jose Battle, was involved with the Bay of Pigs invasion, where from the United States, Cuban dissidents that were against the Castro regime, with the help of the United States and President Kennedy, went in to try to overthrow Castro. They failed, and it was a notorious botch on Kennedy's part. Kennedy was not able, with the help of this Cuban mafia, to overthrow the government. And then Castro really, Castro really turned against Kennedy when he aligned himself during the time of the Cold War with the Soviet Union and put um, established Soviet missile bases in Cuba aimed at the United States. And that's what they call the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Soviet Union and the United States came this close to going to war. And ever since that time, from that time to 2014, when Obama started to lift the embargo, all Cuban products were banned in the United States, and all American products were banned in Cuba. There was a trade embargo on them, hoping to starve them out economically and um, cause the Cuban people to revolt and to throw out the Castro brothers. That never really happened. Of course, the CIA, the FBI, and stuff always tried to assassinate Fidel Castro. They tried to poison him. They tried to kill him a bunch of different ways, but none were successful until uh, he he passed away in 2016 of natural causes. But the point is that um, from the beginning, basically, the United States has influenced um, Cuban, tried to influence Cuban politics, tried to influence Cuban society, and was once a very strong ally of the Cuban people until um, this happened. Until Cuba said, "Wait a minute, I want to assert." They wanted to assert their own independence, their own sovereignty, and get rid of these puppet puppet governments that the United States had in power. But by doing so, a lot of them were tricked and allowed, and Fidel Castro was allowed to implement a lot of socialist laws, and it didn't. Um, as with all revolutions, I feel with all revolutions, the Chinese government, the Chinese Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, all these other revolutions. Um, a lot of times, the ideals of these revolutions don't always pan out to to be um, to be the reality. Idealism. The problem with idealism is that you can't always live up to it. You know, and they might have had lofty intentions, and they might have had good intentions, but um, it just didn't really work out. You know, they went to communism, and the people. The problem with communism is that okay, in theory, every, everybody is equal, but in practice, everyone is not equal. You know, there's only a certain amount of resources to go around. So when you ration off resources, a lot of times um, those same goods and resources don't reach the bottom people. Of course, that happens with capitalism as well. But the problem with capital, I mean, the difference with capitalism is that capitalism uh, gives one, in theory at least, the incentive to work, whereas communism doesn't because everybody is paid equally the same. So it um, it stagnates um, it stagnates progress, in my opinion. That's only an opinion, but what it tends to do, it tends to lead to dictatorial type governments like that in the Chinese or Cuba or the former Soviet Union because people see that this is against the nature. This is against the nature of human beings. Human beings want that profit incentive, and when they don't have that, um, it could lead to the stagnation uh, of the human spirit. So that's basically it. What I think is going to happen at this point is going to be, um, I think it's going to succeed. It's going to be an overthrow of of the communist regime in Cuba, a change for Cuba moving towards a more democratic society. Sometimes when the United States opens up relations with a country like they opened up relations with China in the 70s, but it led to economic growth in China. They freed up the economy. It wasn't so much a command economy, but it didn't free up the rights for the people. Human rights is still a big problem in China, and oppression is still a big problem in China. So if if they do end up freeing up the economy, and they do end up liberalizing aspects of the economy, I hope they end up liberalizing the politics as well, and freeing up. Don't just free up the economy. Don't just free up people financially. Free them up politically and socially as well. Give them social and political freedom as well as political freedom. They go hand in hand. You can't really have, if you have social freedom, you will want political. I mean, you want economic freedom. If you have economic freedom, you will want social freedom too. You know what I mean? So if they start to liberalize the economy and allow people to own private businesses and private enterprise, I hope that they also allow people, to express themselves politically, allow people to have fair and free elections. Not that we in the United States have fair and free elections, because we don't. That's a whole other issue altogether. But I, ideally, we want to. All people want to be free. All people yearn to be free. All people yearn to be free to pursue their own destiny, as our Declaration of Independence says. Um, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I hope that is coming for the people of Cuba. Um, I also, I'm interested to know too, what does the American left think about this? Because for the longest, even when he died, the American left supported Fidel. They looked at Fidel as a sympathetic figure. Um, they looked at Fidel, especially people like Bernie Sanders and stuff, looked at Fidel Castro as to be admired, um, somebody to be emulated, and this really caused a real contention with Cuban Americans, because, of course, Cuban Americans, especially those that were forced out in the initial revolution, and even those that came over in the Mariel in um, in the 70s, where Jimmy Carter and Fidel Castro, they did this trade off where Fidel let a certain amount of political dissonance and a certain amount of political prisoners go from Cuba to the United States. We saw that in the movie Scarface. Remember when Scarface was coming out of the Cuban prisons and going to Miami? He let a lot of the prisoners out, a lot of the insane asylum people. He let them come to the United States, and a lot of those A lot of those people, they weren't all prisoners and criminals and stuff, but a lot of those people were in um, the Mariel boat lift in the late '70s and early '80s. Um, they don't really like the left. They never vote Democrat. They always vote for Republicans because one, they feel that Kennedy and the Democrats dropped the ball when it came to Cuba, and two, um, the left always seemed like they kowtowed and they took it easy on Fidel Castro, and they never really exposed his crimes against humanity. They always played up the good stuff that he did, like when he supported the Black Panthers or he supported black nationalist movements here in the United States. But a lot of Cuban people would say that the communist regime was just as racist and just as exclusionary towards Afro Cubans as the regimes before it. Remember, Cuba also, during the colonial period, was a sugar producing nation and was a slave country, just like Haiti, just like Jamaica, just like Dominican Republic. So they had a lot of the same problems. And when Fidel got in, he promised to bridge the gap between darker skinned Cubans who were more on the poor side and lighter skinned Cubans who were more rich, and promised to end racism and colorism in Cuba, and really didn't do that because most of the rich people and most of the people, the higher upper class people, were entrenched already in the Communist Party. So it just reinforced, in a sense, the social classes, the social schisms, and the social classisms that already existed within the society, just with a new label on it. So, but of course, communist people and supporters of Fidel Castro and the Castro brothers and the communist regime in Cuba will just say that it's just propaganda. That they'll point to the United States. They'll say, well, what about the United States' racism? What about their policies of racism towards their black citizens or their poor citizens or what they're trying to do? Or they'll say, well, what about the political corruption in the United States? Yeah, that's true. That there's political corruption in the states, and that there's racism in the states. But that doesn't say that. That's not really saying anything. Just because there's that in the states doesn't mean that there isn't that in Cuba. It doesn't mean that Cuba is a paradise for the poor or and people of color. You know, both things can be true. Both societies can be um, unfair, unequal, um, and racist and exclusionary. Just because capitalism is bad, that doesn't make communism good. And just because communism is bad, that doesn't make capitalism good. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's not a is or ought fallacy. It's not a is or ought fallacy. It's not a black and white. It's not a black and white issue. Like just because just because Christianity has problems or Christianity is bad, you automatically assume that Islam is good, or just because Islam is bad, Christianity is good. They both can have their problems. You know what I'm saying? So just because you assume that just because you assume that one country has problems, that means the other country is perfect or the other regime is perfect. No, and that's one of the things. racial injustice and racial equality besides the freedom for all people. But the racial inequality and the ethnic inequality within Cuban society is something that the the Afro-Cuban people are protesting as well. You know what I mean? Um, the organization now, you can say what you want about them. The organization Black Lives Matter is a very interesting organization getting involved in this protest because, um, like I said, the left, and particularly the African conscious left and the Black Power left, has always kind of um, patted Fidel Castro on the back and patted the Cuban regime on the back because of the advancements made by Afro Cubans in comparison to where Afro Cuban people were before the revolution. And because of his support of people like Asada Shakur and um, and a lot of other Black Panthers that were allowed to be uh, allowed to allowed refuge in Cuba. They were allowed refuge in Cuba under his regime. So a lot of left wing people always supported Castro's regime, and plus when he came to Harlem and it came to meet with Malcolm X and stuff. So now it's interesting because the left in America that is left like BLM is more concerned more with identity politics than the economic. I mean, the economic politics of Cuba. I mean, the economic politics of Marxism. So they're zeroing in on the treatment of Afro-Cuban people, as opposed to looking at it from a purely economic standpoint, like how Marxism does. So they're not going to be so kind to the communist regime in the way that they used to be. You know what I mean? They used to, the left in the 60s and 70s always used to support any kind of um, revolutionary regime because they felt that that regime being on the side of workers' rights was also on the side of minority rights. But they found out, as in George Orwell's book, everybody is equal, but everybody isn't equal in the same way. So that even though there is supposed equality under a communist or socialist system, there is still inequality, and old prejudices die hard. So if a society is founded on the principles of exclusion of one ethnic group to another, just having a communist regime is not going to eliminate those prejudices. It didn't against Jewish people in what used to be the Russian Empire, and it didn't eliminate ethnic ethnic hatred and ethnic derision among darker skinned and lighter skinned Cubans, Afro Cubans, and people who weren't Afro Cubans. So if it even though communism purports to equal everything out on an equal playing field, a lot of times in history it didn't do that. It only made it worse. And they used the guise of equality and they used the guise of revolution to continuously oppress that group, whether it be Jews in the Soviet Union or black people in Cuba. Now, in regards to Haiti, Haiti's situation is kind of like that in a sense that with Haiti, I feel like the global community of white countries like the United States, France, um, especially the United States and France, the two powers that have been involved in most of Haiti's history. The invasions of Haiti in the 1930s, and the United States has always put in puppet, again, like with Cuba, puppet governments in order to influence Haitian politics. I feel like this is what they're going to do now, and this is going to be another situation like Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier in the 70s. Because when people try to rise up and the common people of Haitians try to take power like they did with Jean Bertrand Aristide, Clinton just threw him out. So the United States doesn't want anybody in what she considers to be her playground in the Caribbean. So they want to continue to influence um, Haitian politics, and I believe, to me, really punish Haiti for the historical significance that Haiti represents within the African diaspora. And that is being the first black republic ever and being the only group of slaves in the Western Hemisphere to ever overthrow a slave master. So they made France actually made Haiti pay reparations back in the 1800s after slavery. They made Haiti pay it. That's one of the reasons why Haiti continues to be the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. But anyway, on top of the hurricane and on top of COVID, we have these political goings on, and we'll have to see what the Cuban protest and the Haitian assassination of the Haitian leader leads us to. We have new pieces on the chessboard now as we move forward. Anyway, guys, good morning, peace, love you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button.